everyone, and thank you for joining. I see a couple of you are hopping into the room here tonight. Just wanted to say welcome. Welcome in. I'll give everyone a couple of seconds just to come on in and get cozy before we get going tonight with our wonderful presentation. Awesome. I'm seeing that number still climb. So very good. Tonight's session is going to be how to plan your gap year, independent versus program or program provider. So we are very excited to be hosting you tonight. And I'm really looking forward to introducing you to some of our expert panelists here in just a few minutes. But as everyone gets in the room and gets settled, I just want to go ahead and take a minute to introduce myself. My name is Kelly Daniels, and I'm an event coordinator for USA Gap Year Fairs. And for the past 14 years, we've partnered with high schools across the country to educate, inspire, and really encourage students to think beyond the four walls of their classroom and look for experiential education opportunities. So we all know that COVID has really impacted our lives, not only to travel, but to host events like this in person. And it's really changed the way, students are thinking about furthering their education and the way that partners and programs are providing these gap year experiences. So very excited to kind of get started here in just a few seconds as everyone still keeps coming in. Awesome, welcome. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and move on. So this event is hosted by Go Overseas, and you can think of us kind of like a Yelp, but for meaningful travel experiences. So we don't actually run or operate any of our own programs overseas, but we are a really good resource for planning these different types of travel. So right here you can see we have study abroad, volunteer, high school abroad, intern work, and of course, gap year opportunities. And I just wanted to throw out there, you may or may not have already heard that we have a huge scholarship this year for gap year students. And the scholarship is eligible for any US students ages 14 to 25. So if you haven't already applied, I just want to go ahead and drop this link in the chat because it should only take you a couple of moments just to get started. And then from there, you have the opportunity to win not one, but two scholarships. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that link. The first scholarship is a $10,000 prize, as you can see here, with a mentorship from our expert gap year counselor, one of our expert gap year counselors, and one of them will be joining us today. So I'm excited for you to meet her. But also wanted to point out that we do have several upcoming events. One important one is our final gap year fair, which is March 30th. And following that, we're going to have 5 other sessions focus on themes. So tonight we're talking about planning your gap year. Next week on Monday, we're going to be covering gap time as career exploration, talking about teaching, internships, and work exchange programs. So there's a lot of really cool panels coming up. So just want to make sure that you know that, you're aware, and if you're interested, you can go ahead and register for those events in that link there in the chat. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. I want to say again, thank you so much for joining us, and we're so glad that you're here tonight. And first, we're going to hear from our wonderful gap year counselor, Julia Rogers, who's an accredited gap year counselor and founder of En Route Consulting. And then we're going to touch base and hear from 2 gap year students, Avery and Simon, who are joining us tonight to share their stories and kind of their perspectives and how they went about planning their gap time. So if you have any questions for us throughout the presentation, please drop them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will get to those at the end of the call. Okay, thanks again, Julia. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'll go ahead and pass the mic to you.
Thank you, Kelly. I feel like this is, we've been doing this, for a couple months now, and Kelly is like on top of it. All those reminders, that smile, she is on top of it. So thank you so much for throwing it to me. And if you've been to a previous, gap year fair or crash course event, you may already know me, but I will reintroduce myself for anybody who doesn't know who I am. My name is Julia Rogers, and I have what I consider the coolest job in the world, in that I am a professional gap year counselor and coach. So that means I work with students and families to help craft, customize, and personalize gap year opportunities. So I'm physically based in Stowe, Vermont, but I work with students all over the country and even internationally. So it's very fun to see how these plans really come together. And I think that's, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the nuts and bolts of that. And then when we hear the student stories later in this presentation, you're really going to see how those plans start to come together and how different they can look. And that's really, the making of a good gap year, is that it is very, very personalized to the person who's taking it. So we're not going to go through some of the basic stuff tonight, but I do want to just anchor ourselves to some common shared knowledge. which is a definition. So on our next slide here, I have what I define a gap year as, which is an extended period of experiential learning in order to deepen one's personal, practical, and professional awareness. So one of the great things about gap time is that there are these guardrails. It's supposed to be an intentional period of time, but within that, there's so much flexibility to get creative and to make it really about what you're curious about, what you want to learn, what are the skills that you are going to need to thrive in higher education or career, or to help you figure out what those next educational steps are. So that's really what this period of time is about. It's definitely not a year off. A lot of people consider it a year on. So with that being said, we can talk a lot about, and there are other presentations where we talk about the benefits of a gap year and how to decide to take a gap year. But because you are all here tonight to talk about gap year planning, that's really what I want to focus on. And this right here is a bit of a flow chart to get you oriented to the steps about planning a gap year. And it is quite different from the college planning process for any of you who have gone into that process, because, and this is how I frame it, but I think of applying to college as, positioning yourself to be accepted by the institutions that you're hoping to get into. A gap year really flips that in reverse. It says, what do you want to do? Where do you want to go? There's very few gap year opportunities that are exclusive or hard to get into or highly competitive in a traditional sense. Most gap year programs and opportunities are mostly looking for people who are enthusiastic and who are ready for whatever experience that opportunity is offering. So it really changes the game when it comes to how to think about planning a period of time, because it's not so much what you can't do or what you might be able to get into, it's what do you want to do? And that I think is one of the coolest reversions, because especially this year, there's been so much that we couldn't do and that we can't do. And so unlocking a gap year is really an opportunity to regain a lot of that sense of control, to rediscover your sense of self, and to discover new things about yourself and the world around you. So with that said, because we are still living in the era of, Corona, we do have to, step one, frame our expectations. A gap year in normal times is going to be, a wavy line. It's not a straight upward trajectory, just like life. And to take that metaphor a little bit further, it's the same in the pandemic times. There's going to be a lot of creativity needed and some open-mindedness and flexibility needed to be able to pivot. And we're going to hear a little bit more from both of our students I know have pivoted as a result of coronavirus. And so you can hear a little bit about how the pandemic has affected their plans. But coming into gap year planning, knowing what we're kind of getting into with this pandemic, you can, prepare yourself to think about where you might be able to go, but know that it might not happen, and think about what you could do, but maybe think about other ways that you could achieve that goal if certain things are not available to you. So that's about what I mean by framing your expectations, to settle into the idea that even in a time of uncertainty, there are going to be ways to get to your gap year goals, which is step number 2. I think that this is really what makes the planning process easier for people, is to know what you want to get out of this period of time. So to go back to our definition of personal, practical, and professional awareness, I think that that's actually the best way to build out your goals for your gap time, to think about it in 3 subcategories. Your personal goals, which are the hobbies, the things you just want to explore because of the fun of it, new things you want to try, all those kinds of things can go in that personal category. The practical category are the life skills that you need in order to be successful later on. So this year, one of the things that I'm hearing is a lot of young people really want to actually regain a lot of their social skills and gain confidence, and have a lot of that personal development happen on their gap time that they feel like they've lost from being online so much this year. There could be other things like learning how to cook, or getting your driver's license, or being able to navigate a large urban area. So those are all kinds of practical goals. And then there's the professional stuff. A lot of people have not had the opportunity to delve into different types of career experiences that can give them some ideas about what they might want to major in, or what types of schooling they might want to do in order to find out what career path they might want to be on. So a gap year is a fantastic time to experiment with lots of different ideas. Or if you think that you want to do a certain industry or go towards a certain industry, do an internship, volunteer, take a job shadow, and any of those things. And it'll really help confirm or deny whether or not you're interested in that field. So those 3 categories, come up with some goals, and that is what you use to research opportunities, which is step 3. So when you're researching opportunities, you all are doing that by being here tonight. You're learning about what's out there. You're talking to people who've taken a gap year. You're looking online and reading articles. You're talking to a gap year coach for a free introductory conversation. You're really casting a wide net at this point to see what the possibilities are. And then once you kind of see what's out there, whether it's programs, whether it's a self-designed gap time, whether it's a combination of different things, that's when you can start really starting to hone in on what am I most excited about here, or what's most feasible for my situation, or how do I order things in a way that makes sense for what I want to do and where I want to be. And then you can also, if you are going to lean towards programs for some or all of your gap time, you definitely want to connect with them, have a conversation, go overseas and read the reviews. That all helps with your research process so you can feel really confident in the program that you're choosing to do. And then this is another like 2020, 2021 caveat, brainstorm a plan B. So for example, last year, I was telling people, please brainstorm a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. So this is an optimistic situation that we're in now where I'm saying, oh, maybe plan B is probably where you can leave it. But think about how you might achieve a goal in a different setting. So for example, you might dream about practicing Spanish by going to Spain and doing a language focused program. That's a very reasonable goal, even this year. But if borders don't open by the fall to Europe, or if it's complicated in some way and you can't get to Europe in the fall of your gap time, how else can you achieve that goal of learning Spanish? You could, do Duolingo and learn it virtually. You could do it under Cambrio and get a language buddy partner virtually. You might be able to find language learning opportunities locally in your town. So those are all examples of plan Bs where you could take that goal and find a more practical solution to achieve that goal at some point during your gap year. The plan B could also be moving that chunk of time to the spring, so that, because that'll give a little bit more time for borders to open or for other things to even out, so that you could do that opportunity. So stay flexible. And then the last part of your gap year is really, I always tell people by high school graduation in the summertime, that's a great goal to have your gap year formed. I think that it really makes those conversations during, graduation parties or Zooms a lot easier when your family asks you, what are you doing after high school? And you can say, I'm taking a gap year. I'm doing this, this, and this. And that feels really good to be able to tell people. So aim to have your itinerary set up by graduation, not necessarily all set in stone, but have it mapped out. So that's kind of the gap year planning basics. I know that slide took a while because there's, a lot to think about, but at the same time, it does there's like a flow to it, and it makes sense. And it's actually very feasible for a family to do this together, or for a student to really understand this process and take charge of their own gap year themselves. So now I want to talk to you a little bit about what you can actually do on a gap year. And again, depending on where you are at in your crash course and USA Gap Year Fairs knowledge, some of this might sound kind of familiar, or maybe you've even attended a specialized session on some of these opportunities. But because tonight we're going to be talking about whether you might want to do a program or an independent gap year, I wanted to subcategorize these by what kind of, are they independent or are they more organized, as a way to frame this conversation that we're going to be having this evening. So when we talk about programs or, that kind of opportunity, what we're talking about is usually an organization or a business that offers some sort of structured learning, experiential learning opportunity, or travel opportunity, or even a volunteer opportunity to a student. And typically what you get with a program experience is a peer group, a little bit more structure in how it works. You get sometimes more mentorship and leaders built into the experience. And typically there's a cost associated with the program. So examples of programs would be experiential semesters. These are lots of programs that are at the gap year fairs where you're traveling with a cohort and you're either learning a language or doing cultural types of learning. You might be doing service learning and volunteering, or you might be doing outdoor adventure and leadership stuff in the wilderness. So those programs typically have a set length of time that you're working within, and again, have that social component built into the programming. Volunteering can really run the gamut. Some volunteer opportunities are local and not part of a program, but what I'm talking about here are these volunteer programs where they set up the type of project that you're working on. They can help you with logistics. So what usually you're paying for to offset the cost of what you cost as a volunteer for this program. But what you get in return is training, logistical support, a peer group, and other types of, and the accommodation and things like that, all organized for you. And then similarly with internships, you might think of an internship as something that you organize independently, but there are also programs that match you with an internship in an industry that you're already interested in, that offer you accommodation and that have a built-in social network of people who are already doing internships in that location. And there are internship programs here in the States as well as internationally. So that's a really cool opportunity to explore for that career experience. There's also all manner of courses. You can learn Italian in Italy. You can learn how to build a boat in Maine. You can learn how to blow glass in Colorado. You can learn how to surf in California or Hawaii. You can learn how to scuba dive in Belize. I mean, I could go on and on. There are so many courses you can do that run every type of topic area that you could ever want, including lots of STEM, like coding and other types of very relevant types of accredited and credit-bearing opportunities. And then lastly, I always like to touch on national service. So national service is what many of us know as AmeriCorps, which is government-funded and government-run service opportunities. So if you've ever heard of programs like City Year or NCCC, those are AmeriCorps opportunities that are open to gap year students. And they are also a program because they offer that training and support and peer group, and they're usually a little bit longer in length. Usually they're 6 to 10 months long. So those are all the examples of programs that you can do on your gap year that have a bit of a vessel that you're within during the time frame that you're doing it. Then there's also an opportunity to do a self-designed gap year. And again, I also want to make sure that you understand that there's ways to mix and match both of these. And I would say most students kind of combine some programming and some self-designed components to their gap year, but you can also go all in on one or the other. So with a self-designed year, you can still meet your goals, you can still have a fantastic experience, and you can still learn so much about yourself, but you might do it in a more independent way outside of what we would consider a program. So that's things like independent projects. You might, write, I literally know a woman this year who wrote a one-woman show, like she wrote a play with part of her gap year. Another student was fixing up an old truck just with her dad as a fun thing to do. So these are things that you are sometimes doing closer to home, or sometimes it's a road trip, and it's something that is a longer term thing that you have to work up towards. I've been mentioning this a lot during this series, but I am really obsessed with these two guys who are driving around the United States fishing for every state fish. So that's a project for them. They're trying to get all 50 states during their gap time. They're going all over the country doing this, and that's the framework that they're using for their gap year. Similarly, travel. There's lots of ways that you can travel outside of a program, whether that be a road trip or backpacking or hiking the Appalachian Trail or the Pacific Crest Trail or something along those lines. Then there's independent internships and work opportunities. So these would be ones that you find through your own personal connections or through your own networking. And typically they're done locally, whether it's local to where you live, or you might, have a family friend or someone you can stay with in another location and then go intern, somewhere else. Or I know some people who will rent an apartment so they can intern in a certain place, that kind of thing. And then working is very similar. Like a lot of students will work. Most students, I actually think, work at some point during their gap year, whether it's the summer after graduation, working half of their gap year so they can be away from home for half of their gap year, or working a part-time job while doing other things. A lot of people are weaving that kind of work experience into their year. And a lot of people say that it's very, very impactful for them because it might be the first time they've ever, earned money through a job. So great to work on your gap year, whether it's to earn a little bit of money to do something, or whether it's for the love of, or for the desire to have that kind of resume building and life building experience. Lastly, work exchange and woofing. Woofing may sound familiar to some people, maybe a foreign concept to other people, but it stands for Worldwide Opportunities on Organic Farms. And work exchange it's kind of an offshoot of this concept of work exchange, which essentially is, going and living on someone's property or working for someone, but instead of getting paid a paycheck, you get room and board. So this concept is very common in the organic farming community, where there are these small scale family run farms, and they kind of bring in what they call helpers to work, in exchange for 4 or 5 hours of work a day. You get free room and board on that farm. And you can do this in really cool places like Hawaii or Europe or other places where it's kind of expensive to travel. And it's a great way to learn new skills and to meet local people and to round out an otherwise, to just have a really cool experience. So that is kind of, again, this is like the tip of the iceberg. Like I wanted to give everybody like an idea of what's out there, but within this and within your own goals, you can really find lots of things within these categories. So, my last 2 slides that I'm going to go over tonight before I turn over to our students is just the difference between like the thought process of what you need to think about when examining a program versus what you need to be kind of thinking about when you're looking at designing your own concept for a gap year or a gap segment of your gap year. So when we're talking about looking at a program, there's really these concentric circles of elements that make up a program and that help you find the right fit for a program. So there's the program structure itself. How much free time do you have? How intense is it? Is it academically rigorous in any way? Is it physically rigorous in any way? Like really understanding what goes into it, understanding the thematic nature of it and what activities you're going to be doing. Is it exciting to you? Are there, I would say that you don't need to love 100% of the things you're doing to join a program. I would say like 75 or 80% should be your goal, because those things that you don't think you might like doing might actually be your best opportunities for growth, because they might put you out of your comfort zone, which is one of the things we really want students to engage in on their gap time. And then, understanding the social situation of a program. A lot of students want to have peers in their midst on their gap time. And so some programs have a set cohort of people that you're traveling with or you're with the whole time. Other programs have people that come and go, but you're always have the opportunity to hang out with other people. And then other opportunities are more independent, where it's like, I'm going to volunteer for this organization. There will be other humans, but they might not be gap year aged humans. So that's important to know going in. How much mentorship and support are you going to get? It can be nice to have that guidance and have those people that you can really use as a sounding board and who can help guide you through an experience. And lastly, like, what is the cost? Does the cost justify what you think you're going to get out of it? You could throw spaghetti at a wall and hit some really great gap year programs, but that doesn't mean that they're the right fit for you. So you really want to make sure that the whole package makes sense for your gap year goals, for what you want to be doing, and for your budget. So on the flip side, when thinking about independent opportunities, there's just more logistics to think about. It's kind of like, again, we're talking about flipping the script a little bit. With a program, you're making sure that you like the elements of the program. With the self-design portions, and Jessica, you can advance the slide on this too, if it's, there you go. With the self-design things, it's your job to think of the logistics and the components that make up the experience to make sure that it's going to be what you want. So this is just a couple examples of what would constitute a self-designed portion of gap time or a significant portion of gap time. Like, for example, if you're going on a road trip, like, are you going with a buddy? Usually you want to, right? Where's the end goal of the road trip? How much is it going to cost for you to do this road trip? I had students this year, a duo who road tripped out west for part of their gap time, and they actually had to locate a car. They had to convince one of their parents to lend them a kind of an underused vehicle, and that family had to go with only one car back home while those students were on their road trip. So that was something they had to negotiate. Where are you going to stay? Are you going to camp? Are you going to do Airbnbs? Are you going to stay with friends and family? So there's just more to think about, but the kind of experience that you can create is really great. And it's also going to provide you with so much organizational skill building and decision making, all that kind of stuff, that you're going to grow a lot from it. I did have a student this year who started his own business with a friend. And so you have to think of like, what are you offering the public? Do you have any partners in it? What kinds of education do you need to attain to actually make that happen? Like, do you need to build a website? Do you need to learn how to code to build a website? That kind of thing. And what's the end goal? Like, how do you define success if you're doing something on your gap year and you know that you're going to be ending your gap year at some point and starting the next thing? Is the goal to just try this business out to see if it's viable? Is it to have a part-time side hustle while you're in college? You know, thinking through what the goal of this experiment is. And then lots of people, lots of artists and other types of creatives spend time on their gap year, you know, testing things out and really pushing the boundaries of their creative influences and things like that. So thinking about, you know, what would go into that if you spent your gap year, you know, doing something creative. There's a kid who I follow on Instagram, student, young man, named Matthew, and he went full time with his art on his gap year, and he has a huge Instagram and YouTube following. He's selling his art. Sounds like he's just really maximizing his gap time when it comes to his creative side. And so on this, you know, on the left-hand side, those are just things to think about when you're thinking about your self-designed gap year time. Do you have the organizational skills needed to make this happen? Where would you live? Are you okay living at home? Do you feel like you need to be away from home to really grow? Do you have access to the socialization that you would need if most of your friends are going away to college? And, you know, we'll hear a little bit about what Simon has to say about that too. How do you create your daily rhythm when you're on your own schedule? That can be a challenge. And then just, are you achieving, you know, goals through this? What goals are you achieving through this project, and what else do you want to do on your gap time? So I have just been talking, and I know that we all want to hear from actual real life students who've been through this. So I am going to introduce you to Avery. And Avery took a gap year that was 2019 into 2020. So she was actually COVID disrupted. And Avery, why don't you tell us a little bit about your time and yeah, how it all went for you?
All right. Hi. After hearing Julia talk about all that stuff, I want to take another gap year, but I will settle for telling you about the one I already took. So my gap year was program based. I had two main programs, and I had the pleasure of working with Julia to plan my gap year. So my first gap year program was a program in Dublin, and I went to a culinary school for 3 months. My second one was after the holidays. I went to France, Toulouse, and I stayed with a host family and did a language and culture program. Also very fun. The two main differences between these two programs for me was that the culinary school was not designed for gap year students, which is something that Julia was mentioning earlier. So I really had to look for my people, and it was honestly pretty scary at first because I went and I had this class with maybe 6 other people, and they were like all 30. And I kind of had a moment where I was reeling, and I was like, where am I going to find people to talk to for 3 months who can actually relate to me? Whereas with the Toulouse program, it was more of a prescribed cohort of people of American students who I really gelled with very quick because we were in very close quarters and both experiencing the same thing. So we grew close very quickly. You can see us in Bordeaux there in my picture. Yeah, and so I think one of the main things that I would ask myself if I were starting to plan another gap year is, where am I going to find my people? And also to know that if you make a plan of somewhere to find your people, like, you might not find them where you think you will. Like I did a restaurant stage or internship in Dublin as part of my cooking program. And I really loved the people at the restaurant. And so I went back every weekend to work there. And it was something that I chose to do. And it was just so exciting. I went to work and I didn't have to, like, I was not getting paid. And I worked very long hours, and it was hard, but it was just so rewarding and so fun. And I found people there that I ended up actually staying in touch with now. I text them to this day. I recently texted them happy St. Patty's Day and everything. And I feel so excited to have people in Ireland. And also additionally in my French gap year, my French gap year program, I had a host family who I also still am in touch with. So it was really good to have people. That being said, I did find a lot of confidence in being on my own in Dublin, like especially as a young woman, like walking alone in a city and stuff. I kind of like was able to gain that confidence of even like tangible things like how I moved. And I found that in France, I also gained confidence in things like singing and like dancing. And those were things that I wasn't really looking for, but are those things that I can really see that I actually grew in. And so I think that that's really important too. Another important thing for me for going on programs where there was some free time was to try to find places or like niches in that program that you want to explore for yourself. So like in France, I took my black and white film camera and I tried to find a dark room in France, which was like a bit of like a hunt around the city, which was really cool. And I got to talk to different people. I went to different like photography stores, and I actually eventually found one, but then was sent home for quarantine for COVID. So that was kind of sad, but it was still fun to look for it, even though I didn't really get anything like actually tangible out of it, any artwork. And then I think the last thing, I don't want to talk too much, but the last thing that I think is really important is that your gap year, you get as much as you give in your gap year. And I don't mean that as in like, don't waste this time. I mean it as in you can put in as much as you want, even if that's not necessarily like that's not necessarily your all. Like you don't have to, you can choose what you want to focus on. Like sometimes in the French classes, language classes that I had, I didn't like really want to do my homework. And so I knew it was for me and I wasn't trying to please anybody else. So maybe I just didn't do my homework for that day. And then I can invest more time in being bold socially. And like that's something that I think I got so much more out of than doing my homework. And yeah, I did learn French and I'm really excited to keep learning French. I'm still doing it in college. But yeah, I think that's really important, is to put in as much as you want to get out for yourself. And I will pass it along to Simon.
Awesome. Thank you, Avery. I'm really excited for all of you guys. Just starting your gap year journeys. This is something that I never imagined myself in my senior year even doing. And because of COVID, my school went online and I ended up taking a gap year, and it's been just amazing and one of the best things that's ever happened to me. And so I'll just run through the cliff notes because I've done so much throughout this year. I don't want to dwell too much on the actual things and the nitty gritty of what I've done, but I did some paid work the first few months of my gap year because it was so last minute that I decided to take a gap year. I just, got a job, tried to do something. So I was, I wasn't just floating out in space. I had some structure to my day. I was doing something every day. And as I worked more, I started to feel like, okay, I kind of want to venture off a little bit more. I want to break away from this very structured format of my day. And I ended up starting a podcast. And this was a kind of a personal project, one of those independent routes. And I really got into this. I did a lot of legwork up front. I got really into it and launched my podcast. And I'm still doing that now. I got to talk to so many interesting people through that. And that was something that I always wanted to do, and I never had the time to do until I took a gap year. So it was great to have that time to invest in something like a podcast, which has turned out to be a great networking tool as well. And then I kind of mixed in, like Julia prefaced, there are ways that you can mix both programs and a self-designed gap year experience into one. And I ended up actually through social media finding out about a internship program that combines professional experience and skills and curriculum along with some internship placements. So I'm currently doing that, and I've been doing that the past few months, and that's worked wonders for my experience in the workforce, learning how to work with managers. Um, I just, as a high school student, never had that kind of interaction with a manager or being actually inside of an internship. I didn't know what that looked like, and I think going into college, that's huge for me because now I kind of have a leg up because of this program. And then the final point is education, like finding ways to continue to educate yourself, podcasts, YouTube videos. I started, building a personal library, which I have right next to me. And, this doesn't have to be conventional. You can finally have time to explore the paths that you didn't get to take during high school. During high school, sometimes there's such a burden on you to get all your work done. And I'm sure there's a lot of driven students out there that feel this burden. And now you can kind of ease yourself and actually explore the topics that interest you, which I found to be very, very rewarding. And then finally, I'll focus on these takeaways because what's huge for me has been the networking. When I started my gap year, I made sure to voice that to my network, and my parents made sure to voice that to their professional networks. Because when you tell people and you put that out into the world, opportunities will fall into your lap. And that's what I found happening to me. Opportunities were just popping up all over the place. And I really even had my I could pick and choose what I wanted to do. And then being flexible with things, you can have a very planned approach. And mine was kind of on a whim, my gap year, so it was less planned than what you guys are doing, which is great. But also make sure that you're flexible with things. As Julia said, you want to make sure that you're comfortable being uncomfortable. In a gap year, it's going to be a little bit different than what you're used to. So you need to attack things and take action when things pass by. And finally, try new things. The podcast, um, something that I always wanted to do. Personal finance is something I got into because of my paid work. Investing, there's so many things. The possibilities are really endless. So just try things. Just try something that you've always wanted to do. And it's just such an amazing opportunity. I'd be more than happy to talk more about my story with any of you. So feel free to reach out to me.
Okay, thank you so much, Simon and Avery, and Julia, of course, for that wonderful presentation. I'm just over here sitting of all thinking about all the amazing opportunities and experiences both of you have just shared. And just even for myself, I'm obviously not a gap year student, but one question in the chat is, is this for college kids? And I think that is a great question. And Julia can touch on this too, but there's no right or wrong, answer for a gap year. You could be out of high school, which is most common, going into college and take that time. You could be in college and decide that maybe college isn't for you. Maybe freshman Zoom U is not what you want to do. So it's gap year time. And I think that that's the most important kind of cool thing about it is it's pretty flexible. Like Julie said, there's not one cut out for every student. It's unique to you. So that's so great. Thank you guys again for sharing. I do have some wonderful Q&As I want to go ahead and get to from our audience. And if you are out there watching and you have a question that you haven't popped in the chat, go ahead and do so. Just drop it in the Q&A box and we will get to it. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. It looks like, Julia, we have a specific question about those WOOF organizations that you mentioned in your presentation. Maybe you could just drop a link. It looks like this attendee is wondering how can I connect and vet WOOF organizations. So I think you could maybe touch on that, but probably drop a link. There's information on that on the web, right?
Yeah, it's pretty, I'll drop a couple of the links. So the woofing itself is kind of a TM, and they actually divide up by country. So the Woofing USA, for example, is kind of the network that's within the US and et cetera, in other countries. And there's another one called Workaway, and that one is worldwide. And they're basically membership-based organizations where you sign up, you create a profile with your picture and your experience, and then you can kind of matchmake with what they call hosts, and you're the helper. And that's kind of how you create your experience with those kinds of opportunities. So go ahead and drop those.
Good to know.
in the
Yeah,
bottom.
thank you so much, Julia. That'd be really helpful. And it looks like we have a question for Avery and Simon. So this is a good time to pose this one. Were your family supportive of your gap year? And it looks like their parents, this person's parents, are a little bit worried or nervous for their upcoming gap year. So what do you think, Avery, Simon? Did you have super supportive families, or did you have to kind of get them over to your side? Oh,
I
Avery, I
can
think
take
you're
this
muted.
one to start. Yeah,
Yeah, Simon,
I
go
was
for it.
I was so lucky. My parents were extremely supportive. To give you a little more context, like basically 2 or 3 weeks before I was heading off to college, they announced that they were going to a remote semester, and so it was very last minute that I decided to take this gap year. But lucky enough, my parents and I had kind of seen this coming, so we had that conversation, and they knew me, and I knew myself well enough that Zoom U was not for me, and I would not get value out of that. So I was lucky enough to have them on board throughout this whole thing, which was great.
Yeah, I also had very supportive parents about this. I think maybe, I mean, I don't exactly know what your parents are worried about specifically, um, but if you have like a clear reason why you're doing this, like for me, I felt kind of burnt out from high school, and I just think like I thought it'd be really good for my mental health, which it was. Um, I mean, my mom had was worried about like me going abroad as like a young woman and me my safety, and I think that that's very valid. I know since I worked with Julia, and Julia knows a lot about this stuff, she was able to talk to my parents about that, and I mean she's knowledgeable in what other students have gone through, so I think that they were reassured that way. um, but I think just setting intentions might um, make your parents a little more soothed.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, Avery and Simon. It's good to hear that you both, had a lot of support there. But I could see it can be kind of a scary thing for parents. So that is a great segue for me to just drop this link for our wonderful speaker, Julia, into the chat, because she offers a free 45-minute consultative service where you can just brainstorm. You can hop on the phone. I don't know, Julia, if you want to say anything else, but there's the link if you're interested. I actually have a question in the chat asking about Julia's contact. So there that is. And the next question for Julia, again, do you help students plan their entire year? I'm thinking about doing something this summer, but plan on attending school in the fall. So it sounds like they're wondering, can you just do something in the summer?
Yes. So I mostly focus my formal consulting on students who are taking either a gap semester or a gap year, usually like a 6-month or longer block of time. But anybody is entitled to kind of reach out and have that exploratory conversation. And sometimes we can get enough done in those calls where you can say like, okay, I think I know where I need to go from here to plan my summer out. So we could definitely connect that way. And yeah, I think that to Avery's point too, if you have any hesitant family members, or if you're a parent who has a hesitant student, those kinds of exploratory conversations can be really helpful, because usually whatever those concerns are can be addressed one way or the other through explanation or example. Yeah, I think that talking to people who have experience, whether it's someone like me or someone in your life who's taken a gap year, who has a kid who's taken a gap year, is just it really opens your eyes to what like these amazing people do with their time. So I think that getting involved with knowing more people who've done it helps a lot with that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And something that I used to say all the time when I used to work at a program provider is ask for alumni. You can talk to recent alumni, recent parents who have sent their children or child, or if it's another student, to a program. So definitely reach out and collect those resources like Julia mentioned. This next one I can answer real quickly, which is what are some good resources and scholarships for funding gap time? So let me just drop a couple of links here in the chat. The first is going to be a link to our USA Gap Year Fair scholarship. Or I'm sorry, that's the second link I dropped. The first is an article that we host on Go Overseas, and it's 26 gap year scholarships to apply for this year. So definitely check that out. I think that's probably good there on the scholarship front, and apply to our Go Overseas scholarship if you have not done so already. It looks like an attendee is asking Julia, that is saying that these programs seem super expensive, at least $25,000 per semester. Are there any that emphasize being outside without the Ivy League price tag?
Oh, it's such a good question, because I think that I think that a lot of times, especially at the gap year fairs, you're exposed to more of these formal programs, and so some of the more affordable options, or seemingly affordable options, can kind of hide under the surface of what's obvious. And so for outdoor-based experiences, those are more expensive because I'll be honest, the liability insurance and the training and the risk management that goes into bringing young people into the wilderness and having them do things like rock climb and backpack, or go to places where there's bears, all that stuff, makes it so that they have very highly trained and competent leaders. And that is why the price tag is associated with that. So I wouldn't say that bargain hunting is where you want to go with outdoor focused programs necessarily, but one thing that I would invite you to consider is potentially investing in a shorter outdoor-based program. So Knowles, for example, runs, and Outward Bound as well. They have 1 week, 2 week, even 3 week long programs. It's not a whole semester, so it's not going to be that higher price tag, but it will give that student the foundational knowledge to learn how to camp, to learn how to leave no trace, all the principles that you would need to move into a backcountry situation safely. So investing a smaller amount in a shorter program, and then maybe that student could tackle a camping experience, or like a road trip where you're camping on the, at KOAs and stuff like that, with a lot more confidence and safety knowledge than spending an entire semester doing that kind of outdoor program. So you can kind of have your cake and eat it too with something like that. And then I'd also, invite you to consider just lower cost programs in general. So a lot of volunteering opportunities or national service opportunities. For example, there are some national service opportunities where you actually do trail building in our national parks. That's pretty close to an outdoor education program, except for that there's no cost associated with it at all. In fact, students usually get a living stipend at the as they're doing it, and then afterwards as well to put towards college. So those are some really good examples of how to spend time in the outdoors to get a lot of cool and relevant training, but to do it in a more affordable way. So is it okay if I drop that link in the chat too, Kelly?
Yeah, of course, definitely drop
Okay.
anything that you would like to share. And this
Okay,
one's
cool.
a good one for Avery and Simon. I don't know if either of you had to defer college admission. Did either of you apply for colleges before your gap time, or are you waiting, or where are you guys at in that process?
So I'm in college right now. I'm my freshman year. I did apply to colleges first and then defer. So Julie gave me a little template to write the letter, and you just kind of tell them what your goals are, why you're taking a gap year, telling them that you're not going to sit on your butt the entire year. And I mean, I'm sure it depends based on the college, but mine was very happy to have me take a gap year. They had me check in halfway through, and I kind of went a little overboard on it. I wrote a very long email about how much I was enjoying my gap year. Whereas I know I have another friend who wrote 2 sentences. But yeah, you just have to check in so that they know that you're still doing well.
Yeah, that's great. And Julia just posted that template you used, it looks like. So thank you, Julia. And that's great. You had a positive experience. Simon, did you have to go through anything like that?
Yeah, I'm actually currently going through that process as well. Very similar to Avery, I applied to colleges my senior year, and then I deferred my enrollments. And I actually just got an email this week asking me how I'm doing and how things are going. So yeah, just basically updating them about halfway through. And then they ask about your plans, whether or not you're going to enroll and that sort of thing. But yeah, same thing.
That's great. Yeah. Okay, good. Good to hear. I asked you that question because we have an attendee out there asking about if they can take a gap year program during high school. So I'm not sure how old they are, where they're at, but what schools allow it and how the deferral process works. So that's why I kind of prompted you guys with that one. And what I will do here actually for this attendee with this question is I have a really great resource. It's our gap year guide. I'm just going to pop that in the chat for you all because you can open up. We have over, oh gosh, I think maybe 30 plus programs on that guide. And it actually lists the ages that are acceptable or that they admit for each program. So definitely check that. Another resource is Go Overseas / High School Abroad. You can take a look at what programs are offered there as well. So that sounds great. Let's see, last two questions we have here. One is asking if we can go over internships. And so we can touch on internships if you want to, Julia. If you have anything, you could just like 2 seconds on internships during gap time, things to know. But I do want to plug on Monday night at 7 p.m., same time, same place, we are hosting an internship session. So we're going to be talking about teaching abroad, internships, work experiences, all that good stuff. So I'll post that link. And Julia, if you want to add anything about maybe just a couple quick thoughts to know on internships.
Yeah, definitely. And I'd be delighted for Simon to add as well, because he's, doing an internship program. But I think that, there are those two routes to go. And I think that Simon made a really wise point in talking about leveraging your network. And even if you don't think that your network is very wide ranging, there are more people than you might think. It's not just your parents, but it's also your parents' if they went to college, their college friends, their coworkers, your network, your teachers, your guidance counselor, people who are ready to kind of put themselves out there for you, that can really bring back some really cool experiences. So definitely use your network to explore those kinds of professional opportunities. And then these internship programs, they are searchable on Go Overseas. And typically what happens is if you find a program, for example, there are programs that do internships in places like Dublin or Cape Town, South Africa, or even Spanish-speaking countries if you speak Spanish. And they will take your resume, they'll do an interview with you, the internship program themselves, and then they will match you with a company or a nonprofit based on kind of how they package you, and then they kind of connect you with some of their partners. So they guarantee a placement, and then there's a matchmaking process to kind of finesse what that will actually look like. And then the programs usually have housing and accommodation that they own or that they rent out in those cities. So you're living with other interns, and then everyone's kind of going off in the morning and to their own internships, and can socialize at nights and weekends. These are definitely more independent opportunities. So a lot of times students won't necessarily start their gap year with an internship program unless they already have that kind of savvy. But sometimes it's a nice thing to build up to. So they might do something that allows them to build those kinds of leadership and autonomy skills, earlier in their year, and then do an international or a domestic internship away from home, later in their gap time, like the second half of it at some point. Simon, what do you have to say about your internship experience?
Yeah, so first thing I want to touch on and kind of reiterate is the fact that you have to build up to this. Because for me, like working and doing paid work at the start of the year helps me build maturity and just the ability to interact with adults and articulate my ideas. That was huge. And I don't think I would have been able to step right into an internship program. And when I did, I was fully prepared to. So like I said, don't have any experience. So I was really open. This is a program that's very similar to what Julie was talking about, where you kind of tell them what your goals are and what you want to get out of the experience, and they package you up, and then they place you on these short-term internships. So I have like 3 or 4 internships within a 3-month span. And it's just been great getting out there and getting experience. I would say for me, it's just helps me build those professional skills, like learning to use LinkedIn, building resumes, cover letters, and those sorts of things that they added on top of the internships has just been huge. So that's something to say for an actual internship program that kind of gives you a robust curriculum alongside of just the internship itself, if you're starting out and this is your first experience with internship.
Great, thank you both so much. And I'm just answering a question that came in the chat here. But it looks like we had a couple more. We have just a few minutes left. So let's go ahead and move on. Do you have any alums who did not apply to go to college during their senior year? Also, any who took more than one gap year? Great question. And I think as Avery mentioned earlier, she's ready for her next gap year. So Julia, you can talk a little bit about that.
Definitely. And I think that especially this year, that we're seeing that this is a pretty complicated college admissions cycle because of COVID and test optional schools and things like that. So there could be many valid reasons for a student either not committing to a school this year or maybe just having not applied because they can't visit campus and all those kinds of things. So in normal times, it's ideal to kind of defer your admission after having applied senior year to college, but it's not a problem to apply to college on your gap year. And sometimes, depending on the experiences that you might have at the beginning of your gap year, you can also, tout those on your application. So if you do an internship or you do a cool program that you can speak to, or you can even lay out your plans in your, admissions proposal. So those are all great things. And colleges know that gap year students are, really high functioning students once they get to campus, and they really actually like gap year students. There have been several studies that have shown that gap year students actually perform better academically and graduate sooner than traditional students. So the college admissions teams know this, and they recognize that when students are applying during their gap year as well. So as long as you can kind of frame it properly, it can only help you, really. And then to the second question, what was the second part of that question? Help me out, Kelly.
Yes, of course. The second part of that question was asking if you had any students. Oh gosh, if you had
more than 1 year.
Yeah. More than 1 year.
Yes. Okay. So I would say that if you are college bound, that taking like more than a year off, you should have a good reason for it. So there are students who have mental health challenges, who have, post-concussive disorder after an injury that make it hard to learn or study. In those kinds of situations, you take the time you need, there's no rush. If you're a more traditional gap year student who plans to go to college afterwards, I would say keep it to a year. After that, your, academic skills or your organizational skills could start to suffer. But at the same time, lots of students are finding creative pathways to create the kind of career they want that don't necessitate a college degree. I think we also have to be very cognizant and welcoming of the multiple paths that a student can take, whether that's community college, vocational school, the military, building out their own educational experience that fits a career that they want to do. So I think there's a lot of nuance to that part of the conversation, but I think in general, as long as a student has intentions for after their gap time, that's really what we want to see.
Yeah, I think that is exactly what I mentioned in the chat to the parent who asked. It's really about intention. We had the director of admissions of WSU Vancouver on Monday night, and that's exactly what she said. As long as a student shows intention, their academic plan hasn't changed, right? They're still a great student and they still want to pursue XYZ. But like Julia mentioned, they may not. They may change their plans, and that's okay too. So it's just about being flexible. Okay, here we have a last couple of questions. I think this is a good one for Avery and Simon to just touch on. How do I convince my kiddos that it's a good idea? I think he feels all of his friends are going to college, so it will be strange not to do so as well. And I hear that a lot. Simon, how did you deal with that? If your class was moving on and you were taking a gap year, did you experience any difficulties there?
This is so tough. This was one of the hardest parts for me about taking a gap year. It's like you do feel lonely at times, especially for me. Literally all my friends, my whole friend group went off to school, and all their schools got to go this fall. And mine, for some reason, went remote, and they decided that COVID was more of a problem. So it was definitely, that was a struggle for me getting over that. But at the same time, I think it's also helped me kind of focus on myself and focus on me a little bit more. And I got to do a little bit more personal growth, more than I was used to. And I got to feel a little bit more self-sufficient. So that can be very difficult. And that can be one of the hardest parts, at least from my perspective, about taking a gap year. And you find ways to deal with it, I think. And you also, you meet new people depending on what you do. Avery said you made a lot of great relationships. So there are ways that you can continue to have some sort of socialization throughout the gap year.
Awesome. Avery, anything to add?
Yeah, that is so true. And I thought it would be weird too, but it really wasn't as noticeable as I thought it would be, because I mean, all of us were leaving high school anyway, so we were going to be long distance anyway, because we all went to different colleges. And so I didn't feel so separate from them, because we were all having these new independent experiences without each other. And so it just wasn't as drastic as I thought it would be. I didn't feel left behind.
Sure. That's great. Good to hear. I'm happy to hear that. And like Simon pointed out, you found your people, it sounds like, which is always nice and helpful for everyone. You know, even when you leave college and you're old like me and you go to a new place, you have to find your people. So it's a great skill to pick up and learn. And with that, I think we are going to call it, you guys. We just have 1 minute left. Thank you so much, Julia, Avery, and Simon, for being here with us tonight. And for all of you attending, thank you as well. We've dropped a ton of resources in the chat tonight, so definitely pull those now or open up those pages if you need to. And I'm going to go ahead and just share my last slide here, talking about our upcoming events. Thank you, Avery. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Julia. Okay, great. So as I get this slide up and running, it's just going to kind of point out and give you really a good visual as to what is next. We've talked about several upcoming events here, and the first being on Monday night, where we will cover internships and career experiences, such as teaching internships and other work experiences. And after we finish that on Monday night, Tuesday, like I said earlier on the call, is going to be our final gap year fair. So if you have not joined us for a fair, I highly recommend it. We will have several amazing providers. I think, gosh, maybe 30, 32 providers on that one. So a chance to meet some programs. And then we have on Wednesday, outdoor and adventure programs. A couple people had questions about those types of experiences, followed by arts, language learning, college credit, conservation, sustainability, and social justice. I mean, we've got a lot of really cool panels coming up. So definitely register for those upcoming events. And last thing to point out is that scholarship deadline for that $10,000 and $5,000 scholarship is April 15th. So with that, everyone, it is now 6 o'clock. Thank you again all for joining us. What a wonderful discussion. I really appreciate it, everyone, and hope you have a great night. Hope to see you soon. Bye.
Thanks, Kelly.
You're welcome. Thanks all.